Hello everyone, and thank you for joining me. I'm Tracy Harris, and this is At Home in My Head, the podcast that explores experience and meaning and their impact on individuals and the broader society. December 21st, 1950. The home of Monroe and Mary Means Monk, 950 North Center Street, was bombed. The reason? Mary had dared to challenge the city's zoning laws. If you Google the photo, it's not some minor blast. The front porch is completely wrecked, obliterated. That's likely where the bomb was planted. Just behind that destroyed porch, the Monk's bedroom. They'd only just moved in. They slept there exactly one night, and somehow, colloquially speaking, by sheer miracle, no one was hurt. Just down the same street, in the 1100 block 5 months earlier, July 1949, another bomb tore through the home of Reverend Milton Curry Jr. A few weeks later, August 12th, another bomb hit the same house, and then, in April 1950, a third bomb ripped through the residence. 2 people were inside, and by some brutal grace, they survived. So in 1949, 2 bombs. In 1950, 2 more. 1956, 2 again. 1957, 7. 1958, 2. 1962, 4 churches. 1963, 8 bombings, 4 little girls killed. 1965, several bombs were found and defused. 3 more went off, including at the homes of the mayor and a city council member. And this isn't even the full list. In total, over 40 bombings, all unsolved. This was Dynamite Hill, a neighborhood in Birmingham, Alabama, and back then, the city had a nickname. People called it Bombingham. At the time, the way police handled the violence, or more accurately didn't, made it clear to many that law enforcement wasn't just failing to stop white supremacist terror, they were part of it. Local police were often aligned in the segregationist status quo, and their inaction in the face of bombings and attacks led many to believe they were not just aware of the violence, but complicit in it. And that same failure to protect black citizens echoed all the way up the chain. The outrage reached the federal level. New York Senator Jacob K. Javits, appalled by the way Birmingham police were protecting segregation instead of people, warned that, quote, the country won't tolerate it, unquote, and pushed for civil rights legislation. Other senators, Sherman Cooper of Kentucky and Wayne Morse of Oregon, compared Birmingham to apartheid's South Africa. The New York Times called the Birmingham police, quote, a national disgrace, unquote. The Washington Post editorial board made it clear that the brutality of the authorities didn't represent the will of the people, many of whom had just voted against segregationist policies at the polls. Even President Kennedy had to get involved, sending Assistant Attorney General Burke Marshall to try and broker peace. But negotiations stalled when neither civil rights organizers nor white merchants would budge. So let's be real. Black citizens in these communities were being asked to endure literal terrorism. Their homes were bombed, not for organizing, not for protesting, but simply for existing in them while black. And law enforcement? They weren't neutral. They were aligned with the terrorists and did nothing. By May of 1963, the unrest and protests of the civil rights movement had spread far beyond Dynamite Hill, but Birmingham remained the epicenter, and for good reason. The jails were overflowing with people who stood with the bombed, not the bombers. And yet the same complicit police had the nerve to grab bullhorns and lecture protesters about staying nonviolent, in the face of what was, in every sense, state-sanctioned violence. Those iconic images you've seen, police dogs mauling peace marchers, fire hoses slamming into children, most of that came straight out of Birmingham. And I've had people try to argue with me, tell me those photos don't tell the whole story, try to downplay the brutality. But here's what those folks don't bring up. White supremacists were bombing black homes because they couldn't stand that the people inside weren't white. That's a fact. And the other fact is this. No one was held accountable for most of it until decades later, if at all. You can have your opinions, but here's mine. You can't ask a community to accept being bombed in their sleep while the people they pay taxes to protect and serve look the other way, and then punish them when they fight back. That's not aggression, that's survival. That's self-defense when no one else will defend you. And listen, I've pushed back on the way the U.S. throws around the word terrorist. Anyone we can't buy or beat gets slapped with that label. But in this case, what else would you call it? A group systemically bombing homes under cover of night, targeting families simply for being black and trying to live their lives? That is terrorism, period. Now hold that thought, that image, freeze that moment and time, and let's step back a moment to 1914 when a woman named Sally was born. Sally was a foster child who at the age of 13 or 14 ran away from home to pursue an education. She defied expectations that she should work to support her foster family. She traveled over 50 miles to Birmingham, Alabama, where she found refuge at the local YWCA, which provided her with a room and the opportunity to attend school. Sally excelled academically, completing high school and college, and later pursued a master's degree at New York University while raising her children. Sally was deeply involved in civil rights activism. She was a national officer and leading organizer of the Southern Negro Youth Congress, an organization influenced by the Communist Party that aimed to build alliances among African Americans in the South. Her activism extended to the NAACP, where she was an active member during a time when that involvement was dangerous due to the organization's civil rights activities. Her commitment to social justice included participation in the campaign to free the Scottsboro Boys, 9 black teenagers falsely accused of raping 2 women, a case that became a milestone in the national civil rights movement. Sally was dedicated to education and activism, and that dedication left a lasting impact on her daughter, Angela, who was raised in the Dynamite Hill area. Angela Davis has spoken about how her mother's work and the environment she created at home instilled in her a strong sense of justice and the importance of standing up against oppression. Angela's father, Benjamin Frank Davis, was present but not as outspoken as Sally. He graduated from St. Augustine College, a historically black college in Raleigh, North Carolina, and briefly worked as a teacher, but opened a service station later, which was more lucrative. He was also an Episcopalian lay minister. Frank and Sally Davis were among the first black families to move into Dynamite Hill, and although their home was not specifically targeted, they had front row seats to the violence happening in their community and to their friends and neighbors. What Frank contributed to Angela by way of influence was an emphasis on education, economic independence, and an attitude of community service. By all accounts, he was a dedicated father and community member whose values influenced his daughter's path as an activist and scholar. Growing up in a home sitting in the crosshairs of a white establishment trying to hold the line on segregation, Angela watched as more black families like hers moved into areas previously reserved for whites. She would have been right there when the bombs came. Not once, not twice, repeatedly, and always with the same message: you don't belong here. And the additional message: and the people whose job it is to protect you are on the side trying to terrify and kill you. But the Davises stayed. Angela wasn't just a child of this tension, she was shaped by it. She split her time between Birmingham, her uncle's farm, and trips to New York City, where she'd later reconnect with childhood friends in pivotal ways. She had 3 siblings, 2 brothers, Ben and Reginald, and a sister, Fania. Angela started her schooling at Carrie A. Tuggle School, a segregated black elementary school, then went on to Parker Annex, a junior high branch of Birmingham's Parker High School. And during this time, her home life was buzzing with radical energy. Her mother wasn't just an educator, she was a national officer in the Southern Negro Youth Congress, a group deeply influenced by the Communist Party and committed to building black alliances in the South. That meant Angela grew up surrounded by organizers, thinkers, and revolutionaries. For most of us, these would be people who were more like big ideas floating in the air. But for Angela, they were people at her dinner table. One of those people was Louis Burnham, a leader in the Youth Congress whose daughter Margaret Burnham was Angela's childhood friend. Later, Margaret would serve as her co-counsel during one of the most high-profile trials in American history. But long before that, they were just 2 girls growing up in the middle of a movement. Angela also found community and purpose in the Girl Scouts. She attended church regularly and was active in the youth group, and joined her local scout troop. It wasn't just camping and badges. She marched and picketed as a scout to protest Birmingham's brutal segregation, and in 1959 she traveled to Colorado for the National Girl Scout Roundup. That was her first taste of a broader world, and she never looked back. By her junior year of high school, Angela had been accepted into a Quaker-run program called the American Friends Service Committee. The idea was to place promising black students from the South into integrated schools in the North. Angela chose Elizabeth Irwin High School in Greenwich Village, New York, a school with progressive values and radical politics. It didn't take long before she was recruited into Advance, a communist youth group. The pieces were already falling into place. Angela Davis wasn't radicalized in college. She didn't wake up one day and decide to fight the system. The system raised her. Surrounded by bombs, books, and black resistance, she was born into a fight she would later come to define. Remember that educational influence from her father, Frank? She earned a scholarship to Brandeis University in Massachusetts, one of only 3 black students in her class. It was there, during a rally held amid the Cuban Missile Crisis, that she first encountered philosopher Herbert Marcuse. His influence would be life-changing. Years later, Angela said, "Herbert Marcuse taught me that it was possible to be an academic, an activist, a scholar, and a revolutionary." That one sentence pretty much maps out her life. She picked up part-time jobs to save enough money to travel, and ended up attending the 8th World Festival of Youth and Students in Helsinki, a communist-sponsored event. When she got back to the U.S., the FBI came knocking, wanting to know why she'd attended. She was only 19. At Brandeis, she majored in French and threw herself into the work of Jean-Paul Sartre. She joined a study abroad program that took her to France, first in Biarritz, then later to Sorbonne in Paris, where she lived with a French host family. It was while she was in Biarritz that she got the devastating news about the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing back home in Birmingham, the one mentioned earlier that had murdered 4 little girls. Angela knew them personally. That moment marked her. It was a turning point. By the time she returned to Brandeis, Davis realized that what she really wanted to pursue was philosophy. She sat in on Marcuse's course, and his mentorship sealed it. She graduated in 1965, magna cum laude, Phi Beta Kappa, and already had her sights set on studying abroad. This time, at the University of Frankfurt, right in the heart of post-war Germany, to continue her deep dive into philosophy and radical theory. After graduating from Brandeis, she headed to West Germany for graduate study at the University of Frankfurt. She had a modest stipend, just $100 a month, and spent her first months living with a German family before moving into a loft in an old factory with a crew of students. Many of them were involved in the Socialist German Student Union, or SDS, a far-left group stirring things up across campuses. Angela didn't just study political theory, she lived it. She participated in SDS actions and immersed herself in the energy of Europe's leftist student movements. During her time in Germany in the late 1960s, Angela Davis started noticing something that stuck with her. While she was studying in the West, she took a trip to East Berlin for the May Day celebrations, and what she saw there left an impression. She came away feeling like East Germany, flawed as it was dealing with the legacy of fascism in a way the West simply wasn't. And this wasn't just about ideology, it was about what she saw on the ground, how history was being handled, and how the past was being remembered or ignored. In East Germany, the state defined itself as explicitly anti-fascist. They made a point of removing former Nazis from public life, honoring resistance fighters and building their national identity around the idea that they were the ones who had broken from fascism. They banned Nazi organizations, taught anti-fascism in schools, and erected monuments to victims of Nazi crimes. Meanwhile, West Germany was telling a very different story. After the war, many former Nazi officials were quietly reintegrated into positions of power: judges, civil servants, police. A 2016 report showed that between 1949 and 1973, over half the senior officials in West Germany's justice ministry had Nazi Party backgrounds. Angela Davis, who came from a place where black families were being bombed out of their homes while law enforcement looked away, or worse, could see the difference. And it mattered, because Davis wasn't just looking at Cold War politics. She was looking at how countries remembered violence, how they either named the harm they'd done or pretended it hadn't happened. She saw East Germany engaging publicly with the horrors of fascism, owning it, shaping national policy around resisting it, and she saw West Germany and even the United States protecting the old guard, keeping them in power and moving on without real accountability. And for her, that landed, especially when the GDR also aligned itself with black liberation movements, anti-imperialist struggles, and solidarity campaigns across the global South. For Davis, it wasn't just that East Germany claimed to be anti-fascist, it was that they acted like it, through education, memorials, international alliances, and purges of fascist influence in government. So when Davis later reflected on that trip, she didn't say East Germany was perfect, but she did say they were dealing with their past and their complicity more directly than the US or West Germany ever had. And that's a powerful thing to witness when your own country refuses to name its crimes. But her heart, her attention, were being pulled back across the Atlantic. In the US, the Black Panther Party had just formed. The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, the SNCC, had transformed into an all-black organization. The movements back home were intensifying, and Angela knew she couldn't stay away much longer. After 2 years in Frankfurt, Angela returned to the States and followed her old mentor, Herbert Marcuse, to the University of California, San Diego, where she continued her graduate work and deepened her ties to international liberation movements. She even traveled to London to attend the Dialectics of Liberation conference, which gathered revolutionary minds from across the globe, including Kwame Ture, formerly Stokely Carmichael, and Michael X. Angela admired their passion, but she wasn't completely sold on the strong turn toward black nationalism, especially the way some in the movement were dismissing communism as a white man's thing. That didn't sit right with her. Angela's politics were already more globally rooted, more aligned with anti-capitalist solidarity than with racial essentialism. That's part of what drew her to the Chi Lumumba Club, an all-black branch of the Communist Party USA named after Che Guevara and Patrice Lumumba, revolutionaries from Cuba and Congo, respectively. This was where Angela found alignment, a fusion of black liberation and Marxist analysis. She earned her master's degree in 1968, still studying under Marcuse at UC San Diego. Around 1970, she was working toward a PhD, but things were about to take a turn. After her arrest and prosecution, which we'll get into, the FBI confiscated her doctoral manuscripts. She never received the degree. Instead, she was awarded 3 honorary doctorates in 1972 from Moscow State University, the University of Tashkent, and Karl Marx University in Leipzig. Real ones recognized real work, even if the U.S. government was trying to silence her. Angela eventually returned to Germany in 1981 to continue doctoral work, this time in East Berlin. Some sources have claimed that she received a PhD from Humboldt University, but according to the university itself, there's no record of a formal degree granted. Even so, by that point, her influence as a scholar was undeniable. She didn't need a credential to prove what her ideas were already doing, shaking the world awake. In 1969, Angela Davis stepped into a new role, acting assistant professor of philosophy at UCLA. She had offers from elite schools like Princeton and Swarthmore, but she chose UCLA. Why? Simple. It was in the city. She wanted to be where the action was, close to the people, close to the movement. At this point, Angela was already known as a staunch feminist, a member of the Communist Party USA, and an active figure in the Los Angeles chapter of the Black Panther Party. She joined the Communist Party in 1968 and was directing political education sessions for the Panthers. But when the party's leadership later issued a rule that members couldn't hold dual affiliations, Angela made her call. She kept her Communist Party membership but never fully walked away from the Panthers. Her loyalty was to the cause, not the branding. But UCLA, they had other ideas. That same year, the University of California system dusted off an old policy banning the hiring of communists. On September 19, 1969, the Board of Regents fired Angela Davis from her $10,000 a year position, a move publicly backed by none other than Governor Ronald Reagan, who was already laying the groundwork for his political brand of hard right repression. Angela wasn't having it. She challenged the decision, and Judge Jerry Pact ruled in her favor, declaring the regents couldn't fire her just for being a communist. She got her job back. But the regents weren't done. Less than a year later, on June 20th, 1970, they fired her again, this time claiming it was about her rhetoric. Specifically, they cited her speeches where she condemned the police as pigs and accused the regents themselves of having killed, brutalized, and murdered demonstrators at People's Park. Angela Davis was saying what a lot of people were thinking, but the university system wasn't ready for that kind of truth, especially not from a black communist woman with a following. The American Association of University Professors ended up censuring the regents for their actions, but the message was already loud and clear. Angela Davis wasn't welcome in polite academic circles, not because of what she did, but because of what she stood for. And still, she didn't back down. So let's stop here for a moment and look at a seemingly unrelated incident. In 1970, 3 black inmates at Soledad Prison, George Jackson, Fleta Drumgo, and John Cluchet, became known as the Soledad Brothers after being accused of murdering a white prison guard, John Mills. The charge came under highly suspect circumstances. Just days before Mills' death, another guard had shot and killed 3 black inmates during a prison yard fist fight between inmates. The guard that did the sniping was an expert marksman and positioned in a guard tower where he was not at risk from the violence he was witnessing below. That guard was quickly exonerated, sparking outrage. When Mills was later found dead, thrown from a tier in the prison, the Soledad brothers were charged with little physical evidence and no witnesses. Many viewed the charges as retaliation for rising black radicalism and Jackson's outspoken activism behind bars. He had already been serving an indeterminate sentence of 1 year to life for stealing $70 from a gas station, a sentence widely seen as emblematic of the racial injustice in the criminal legal system. George Jackson, in particular, became a symbol of revolutionary resistance. While incarcerated, he wrote Soledad Brother, The Prison Letters of George Jackson, laying bare the systemic racism and brutality within the prison system. His writings gained national attention and support, especially from the growing prison abolition and black liberation movements. But that spotlight also made him a target. Authorities painted Jackson and his co-defendants as dangerous militants despite glaring holes in the case and the political motivations behind their prosecution. The state's decision to try them together only underscored the performative nature of the charges. It wasn't about justice, but about making an example out of them. This mounting tension around the Soledad brothers would ultimately set the stage for another event, the Marin County Courthouse takeover, a moment that catapulted Angela Davis into the national spotlight. Her connection to George Jackson, both political and personal, became a lightning rod. But before we go there, it's important to understand the injustice of the Soledad brothers' case wasn't just in the questionable evidence or the brutal conditions they endured. It was the way the state wielded its power to silence radical voices. It was about punishment for political thought. And in that climate, the line between legal proceedings and political persecution blurred beyond recognition. By 1970, Angela Davis wasn't just teaching or organizing, she was fighting for lives. She was a vocal supporter of the Soledad brothers. The case, like so many others, was drenched in racial and political tension, and Davis was all in, writing letters, giving speeches, organizing on their behalf. That's how she got close with the Jackson family, especially George Jackson and his younger brother Jonathan. Then came August 7th, 1970. 17-year-old Jonathan Jackson walked into a courtroom in Marin County, California, armed to the teeth. He handed weapons to the black defendants on trial and took hostages, including the judge, the prosecutor, and 3 female jurors. His plan? Get his brother and the other Soledad brothers freed by any means necessary. But before they could escape, gunfire broke out. Bullets flew. And when it was over, Judge Harold Haley was dead, along with Jonathan Jackson and 2 of the defendants. The prosecutor and 1 juror were injured, and among the weapons recovered, a shotgun purchased by Angela Davis just 2 days earlier. That was all the state needed. California law said that anyone who aided and abetted a crime could be charged just like those who carried it out. Angela was hit with first-degree murder and aggravated kidnapping. A judge signed the warrant August 14th, and within 4 days, J. Edgar Hoover had added Davis to the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list, only the 3rd woman ever to appear on it. Angela went underground. For weeks, she stayed in hiding, moving at night, relying on friends, changing locations constantly. Then, on October 13th, FBI agents found her at a Howard Johnson motel in New York City. President Richard Nixon took a victory lap, calling her a dangerous terrorist in public remarks. The press lit up. The headlines were brutal. And again, I want to pause here to point out the question that always arises. What is terrorism, and who are the actual terrorists? The state that allows and even participates in the bombing of citizen homes, or the citizens who push back on that state? But Angela Davis stood her ground. At her arraignment in Marin County Superior Court, she declared, "I am innocent of all charges which have been leveled against me by the state of California." She was represented first by John Abt, the Communist Party's general counsel, and later by Howard Moore Jr. and Leo Branton Jr. While behind bars, Angela was kept in solitary confinement, isolated from the other women. Her legal team fought back and eventually got a federal court order to have her moved out of segregation. Meanwhile, on the outside, a movement was building. Across the country and the world, people rallied to her defense. Black writers and activists in New York formed Black People in Defense of Angela Davis. And by early 1971, over 200 local committees in the U.S. and 67 international groups were working for her release. Even John Lennon and Yoko Ono joined in, releasing the song Angela in her honor. After 16 months in jail, she was granted bail in 1972, paid in part by a California dairy farmer named Roger McAfee, with help from Steve Sparacino, a wealthy business owner. Even the United Presbyterian Church helped cover her legal expenses. The trial itself was moved to Santa Clara County, and when it finally went to the jury, the stakes couldn't have been higher. Angela Davis, black, radical, communist woman, facing charges of murder and kidnapping. The jury deliberated for 13 hours. The verdict? Not guilty on all counts. Even more stunning, one juror raised a Black Power salute to the courtroom crowd after the decision. He later said it was to show unity for all oppressed people. 10 of the jurors attended the victory celebration with the defense team. The state had argued that owning the guns was enough, but the jury disagreed. It wasn't enough to prove intent or involvement. Davis's defense team, led by Leo Branton Jr., used what we now call jury science, analyzing who was likely to be sympathetic to their arguments. They also brought in experts to discredit shaky eyewitness testimony. Angela walked out of that courtroom free, but forever changed. She had survived the state's attempt to erase her. After her acquittal, she became a global figure recognized not just in the U.S., but internationally, especially in countries aligned with the socialist bloc. She went on a speaking tour in 1972 that included stops in Cuba, the Soviet Union, East Germany, and several other regions. Her reception in these places was often enthusiastic, even overwhelming. In Cuba, where she had previously met Fidel Castro during a Communist Party delegation trip in 1969, Afro-Cuban crowds reportedly welcomed her with so much passion she could barely speak. Davis said it was in Cuba that she first felt she had seen a society making meaningful progress in addressing racism, and that only under socialism could that kind of progress take root. She also attended a second Congress of the Federation of Cuban Women in 1974. These visits were part of a broader historical movement. Other black radicals, including Huey Newton, Kwame Ture, aka Stokely Carmichael, and Robert F. Williams, also traveled to Cuba. Assata Shakur would later flee there for asylum. These alliances reflected a shared opposition to racism, imperialism, and U.S. state violence. It's worth noting, though, that these visits and the warm praise Davis gave to some of these governments have raised questions over time. Not necessarily because she praised ideas like socialism or anti-racism, but because she didn't publicly critique those countries' repression of political dissent or human rights abuses. For example, while Davis condemned the U.S. prison system, she did not speak out about political prisoners held in Czechoslovakia or the Soviet Union, something that drew pointed criticism from dissidents like Alexander Solzhenitsyn and Jiří Pelikan. At the time, Davis seemed to view such dissidents as opposing socialism itself, and therefore undermining the fight for global liberation. That perspective shaped her decisions. Whether one agrees or not, it's clear there are layers of ideology, geopolitics, and Cold War dynamics in play that deserve a deeper dive than this overview can provide. Listeners interested in those details will want to explore more nuanced material from Davis herself and from her critics. In 1979, Davis was awarded the Lenin Peace Prize by the Soviet Union and gave a speech in Moscow honoring the October Revolution and Lenin's legacy. She also received honorary degrees from institutions in Moscow, Tashkent, and Leipzig. Again, these moments highlight her alignment with the ideals of socialist internationalism, though they've become flashpoints for retrospective assessments of her political alliances. One particularly controversial moment came in the mid-1970s when Davis expressed support for the People's Temple, the organization led by Jim Jones. Like many activists in the Bay Area at the time, she initially saw the temple as an anti-racist progressive group. In 1977, over a year before the Jonestown tragedy, she even spoke to members via radio during what they called the Six-Day Siege, voicing solidarity and warning that attacks against the temple were attacks against broader progressive movements. She also wrote a letter to President Jimmy Carter in 1978 asking him not to intervene in a custody dispute involving a child in Jonestown, calling Jim Jones a humanitarian in the broadest sense of the word. Again, this was before the mass murder-suicide that would define Jones' legacy. Still, Davis' association with the temple, however short-lived, has remained a source of scrutiny. All of this, her travels, her speeches, her alliances, paints a picture of a woman deeply committed to global solidarity, often operating in a Cold War world where the lines between resistance and repression weren't always clear. It's understandable that some of these choices provoke discomfort or disagreement. Davis herself has said that her views evolved over time, and this period in her life continues to be debated. From a high-level perspective, what stands out is that support for an ideology or a movement doesn't necessarily mean full endorsement of every action taken in its name. That distinction can get lost in retrospective judgment, but it's essential to remember when looking at figures like Angela Davis. This episode doesn't have a space for a full reckoning with every nuance, but for those interested in digging deeper, her speeches, interviews, and writings from the period provide a fuller sense of what she believed and why. After her trial, Angela Davis didn't just return to the classroom, she returned to a complicated and sometimes hostile academic landscape. In 1975, she taught at the Claremont colleges, but under strange conditions. Her Black Studies course was limited to just 26 students out of over 5,000 enrolled across the campuses. Why? Because donors and trustees were worried she'd, quote, indoctrinate, unquote, the student body with communist ideas. Her classes were held at night, often in secret, and the location changed regularly. Students were even sworn to secrecy. This lasted only a short time, but it showed how even after being acquitted, Davis remained politically radioactive in some academic circles. Fast forward 45 years. In 2020, Pomona College invited her back, this time as a distinguished lecturer in history. It was a full-circle moment and a quiet acknowledgement of how much had changed since the days when she had to teach underground. Over the years, Davis held teaching positions across California. She taught women's studies at the San Francisco Art Institute in 1978, then ethnic and political science courses at San Francisco State University through the 1980s. She spent nearly 2 decades as a professor in feminist studies and history of consciousness at UC Santa Cruz and taught at Rutgers, Vassar, and Syracuse as a visiting scholar. She even earned the title of Professor Emerita, a rare honor, especially considering how many institutions once wanted to keep her off campuses entirely. In 2014, she returned to UCLA as a Regents lecturer and spoke again in Royce Hall, the same auditorium where she'd first lectured 45 years earlier, before the state tried to fire her for being a communist. Davis's academic career has always been deeply intertwined with her political activism. She ran for vice president twice in 1980 and 1984 on the Communist Party USA ticket alongside Gus Hall. The campaigns were small, symbolic, and politically fringe, but they were part of Davis' long-standing commitment to socialist principles. By 1991, though, she broke with the Communist Party after internal disputes, including the party's controversial support for the failed Soviet coup attempt. She and other critics had pushed for democratization within the party, but were denied leadership roles. As she put it, they were invited to leave. Davis helped found a new group, the Committees of Correspondence for Democracy and Socialism, and while she hasn't rejoined the CPUSA, she has said she maintains a relationship with them. In 2020, she publicly supported Joe Biden for president, not as an endorsement of all his policies, but as a strategic stand, believing he would be the candidate running at the time who could be most effectively pressured by the far left. Davis has also become one of the most influential voices in the prison abolition movement. She helped coin the term prison industrial complex and co-founded Critical Resistance, a national grassroots group founded on dismantling carceral systems. She's argued that mass incarceration isn't just a broken system, it's a continuation of slavery by other means, especially in how it targets Black communities and poor people. Her answer to that? Invest not in prisons, but in education, health, and community support. She's long said we need to build a world where problems aren't met with cages, but with care. Angela Davis has spent decades giving speeches on racism, war, capitalism, feminism, and queer liberation. Back in 1969, she was already calling out imperialism as the root of suffering across both the U.S. and the global South. She rejected the idea that anti-war activists could afford to ignore racism or sexism, saying those struggles were inseparable. Over the years, she's continued speaking at universities, conferences, Occupy camps, and protests. After 9/11, she was one of the few public figures to openly challenge the war on terror, linking it to structural racism, the prison system, and immigration injustice. After Hurricane Katrina, she didn't blame FEMA incompetence, she blamed capitalism, white supremacy, and neglect. In 1995, she opposed the Million Man March, not because she rejected its goals, but because it excluded women and reinforced patriarchal values. Alongside Kimberly Crenshaw and others, she founded African American Agenda 2000, a black feminist response to that kind of erasure. Davis has consistently opposed the death penalty, and in 2003 she lectured on prison reform and racial justice at Agnes Scott College. She spoke at Occupy Wall Street assemblies, delivered addresses through human microphone methods, and received numerous honors like the Blue Planet Award in 2012, an honorary degree from Dalhousie University in 2018. She's also made headlines for her support of Palestinian rights, including backing the Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions (BDS) movement. That stance cost her the Fred Shuttlesworth Human Rights Award from Birmingham Civil Rights Institute, until public outcry forced the institute to reverse its decision and apologize. Davis remains a complicated, influential, and enduring figure. She's criticized by the right and sometimes by the left. She's been praised as a visionary and condemned as a radical. But through it all, she's stayed consistent in her refusal to separate liberation movements into neat boxes. She connects the dots between race, class, gender, sexuality, incarceration, and empire. And today she's still working, still writing, still speaking, still challenging a system that once tried to lock her away for good. Angela Davis's personal life, like her political one, has moved through different public and private chapters. She was briefly married to photographer Hilton Braithwaite in the early 1980s. But it wasn't until 1997 in an interview with Out magazine that Davis publicly came out as a lesbian. By 2020, she was living with her partner, Gina Dent, a fellow academic, activist, and intersectional feminist at UC Santa Cruz. The two have worked together on prison and police abolition, black liberation, and Palestinian solidarity, reminding us that for Davis, the personal has always been political, and love itself can be a form of resistance. Then came a revelation that surprised even her. In 2023, during an episode of Finding Your Roots, Henry Louis Gates Jr. revealed that Davis is a direct descendant of William Brewster, a Mayflower passenger and early Puritan settler. Davis reacted with visible shock, even laughter, caught off guard to discover she was connected by blood to one of the founding figures of colonial America. But for a black woman in the United States, especially one whose life has been shaped by the fight against racism, capitalism, and state violence, those white ancestral lines aren't just quirky genealogical trivia. They're reminders. The presence of white men in the family trees of black women in this country often traces back to slavery, to ownership, to sexual violence. It's a story of white men's access to black women's bodies. That Mayflower tie isn't just historical irony. It's a direct thread back to the violence that helped shape this nation. The episode also revealed that Davis' grandfather was John Darden, a white Alabama politician. And in a later episode, titled Secret Lives, it was confirmed that she's also related to actress Niecy Nash, a connection that brought a different kind of warmth and surprise. So, yes, Angela Davis is full of surprises, some shaped by revolution, others by genetic contradiction. But all of it, in some way, part of the legacy she continues to confront and reshape on her own terms. I could wrap it here, but I want to talk for a minute about what I had to grapple with as I scripted this episode. It's easy to armchair quarterback history, to sit with hindsight and say what should have been done, what someone should have seen. But what's not easy is imagining what it's like to grow up in a neighborhood where your house could be bombed just because you're black and want to live there, where the police you're paying to protect you aren't just looking the other way, they might be sympathizing with your attackers or straight up aligned with them. I don't know what it's like to take the legal route, to try and work within the system only to watch it fail again and again until the only thing left is self-defense. And then somehow, you become the problem, the violent militant. Meanwhile, the people bombing your home walk free because the law, on paper and in practice, is protecting them. How different would my own views be if I'd grown up like that? If I saw people who reminded me of my own oppressors being imprisoned or driven out or even killed in another part of the world, would I see it as injustice? Or would I see a society defending itself? Would I feel empathy for those in power being taken down? Or would I see, in their downfall, the echo of those who hurt me? Because that matters. One of Angela Davis' most vocal critics was Alexander Solzhenitsyn, the Russian author and dissident who helped expose the brutality of the Soviet Gulag system. I read his novel, A Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich, years ago. It stuck with me. It's a quiet, relentless portrayal of life in a labor camp, based on Solzhenitsyn's own experience. He spent 8 years in a gulag for the crime of criticizing Stalin in a private letter. This wasn't some man propping up the status quo. He was an insider turned dissident, a Marxist turned critic of authoritarianism. A deeply principled man in many ways, though, like all of us, complicated. He raised sharp questions about Davis's silence on political prisoners in the Soviet bloc, and that critique lands differently coming from someone who was one. And yet, I've read some of his later political views, and I can't say that I align with all of them. He became a supporter of Vladimir Putin, which for me is hard to understand. I see repression, I see an ex-KGB strongman consolidating power, but maybe Solzhenitsyn saw something I don't, something in Putin that spoke to his sense of a Russia lost, a culture that mattered to him deeply. I don't know, and I'm not trying to make this about him. What I am saying is that context shapes us. Solzhenitsyn lived through gulags and purges. Davis grew up in a neighborhood under literal terrorist assault, ignored or abetted by the state. And me? I grew up in the shadow of both of them. I didn't live through either. I just read the books and watched the interviews. So no, I'm not the person to sort this all out. I don't know who I'd be if I'd been bombed out of my house. I don't know who I'd be if I spent 8 years breaking rocks for writing the wrong name in a letter. But I think their alignments and their contradictions still matter, even when they don't line up, especially when they don't line up. As we get older, the idea of pure evil gets smaller. I can look at someone like Jim Jones, a man whose actions were monstrous, who orchestrated the mass murder of hundreds, including children, and still ask, did some of his critiques of racism hold water? Were some people drawn to him because of those ideas before they saw what he was capable of? Probably. Does that make his actions less horrific? Absolutely not. But does it explain why people aligned with him for a time, even people like Angela Davis? Yeah, it might. People aren't just ideas. They're experience, perspective, memory, trauma. And Davis' life, like Solzhenitsyn's, was shaped by real violence, real fear, real injustice. That doesn't make everything right. It doesn't absolve. But it helps explain. I'm not saying both sides. I'm not flattening the differences between these people. I'm just saying sometimes we support what we support because of where we've been, because of what we've survived, or what we didn't have to. And isn't that what this podcast is about? Experience, meaning. What does it mean to grow up there versus here? How those experiences shape what we call justice or violence or freedom. Because from one context, it's easy to say, work within the system, be peaceful, follow the rules. But what if the system is bombing your house? Maybe the comfort of distance is what makes some people feel like they can see clearly. But maybe it's the people closest to the violence, the ones under siege, who see the truth clearest of all. So now you know. Not just the headlines, not just the myths, but the complexity, the contradictions, and the context behind Angela Davis and the movements that she stood for. You've heard about the Soledad Brothers, the courtroom violence in Marin, the state-sanctioned repression, the exile, the trial, and the years of struggle that followed. You've seen how Davis was vilified, not for committing violence, but for refusing to bow to a system built on it. If you came into this not knowing her story, I hope you walk away with something valuable, something that honors the rage and brilliance of a woman who never stopped fighting, even when the entire state machinery was leveraged to break her. One that challenges you to ask what you'd do, not in the safety of hindsight, but in the heat of the moment when the law is not just unjust, but lethal. And now the question comes to you. What will you do with what you've learned? You can start by reading her. Not just Soledad Brother, but Are Prisons Obsolete? Women, Race, and Class, and Freedom is a Constant Struggle. You can share this episode. You can challenge the next person who calls radical resistance too much. You can look around at the prison system, at the policing of protest, at the surveillance of dissent, and understand that none of this is past. It's present tense. It's continuity. Angela Davis didn't just survive the system, she exposed it. And if you're listening, really listening, maybe now you can help dismantle it. Originally, this is where I had ended my script. But then I thought more, and something came to me, and I decided I should add it as an epilogue. So here's what I'd like to say at the end of this episode. A few years back, I realized something simple but sharp. We either get involved or we hand our power to someone else. And when it comes to justice, getting involved isn't safe. It's messy. It means risking mistakes in high-stakes terrain. But sitting it out, that doesn't make you innocent. It just makes you absent. The people who act boldly are often the ones who don't care if they do harm. Or worse, they want to. Meanwhile, the ones who hesitate are usually the ones who care too much. That caution gets mistaken for cowardice, when really it's conscience slamming the brakes. But even people trying hard to do good can still cause harm. I've seen it. I've done it. So what now? Do we freeze? Do we wait until we're perfect? Or step in, knowing we might fail and willing to own it when we do? There's this moment in Finding Nemo that's always stuck with me. Marlin says, "I promised I'd never let anything happen to him." And Dory replies, "That's a funny thing to promise because then nothing would ever happen to him." That's the point. If you never let anything happen, nothing ever happens, and nothing is where change goes to die. We are what we do, not what we think, not what we meant. You want to be on the side of right? Then listen, learn, stay humble, and still act. Everyone who's ever done real good has also done some harm. But they didn't let that be the end of the story. There's a Hindu tale Joseph Campbell tells about a prince brought to a hill by a god. Below, two sides of the prince's family are ready for war. The prince refuses to fight. The god tells him, "They're all already dead. The only real question is whether you'll choose a side, whether you'll show up." Make of that what you will. I hear it as a call to engage. not for ego, for impact. Because if you don't step in, someone else will, and they might not give a damn what gets broken. And this morning, it hit me. That's how I feel about AI. Someone recently said, you can't ethically use generative AI. And all I could think was, have you watched The Good Place? You live in a global economy that runs on exploitation, displacement, and genocide, and environmental destruction. There is no such thing as ethical purity under capitalism. If you think you can stay clean by doing nothing, you're lying to yourself. So I'm standing on the hill, watching what's coming, and saying, use the tool, or watch it be used by people who won't care who gets hurt. Be the next Anonymous. Be the next watchdog, hacker, builder, liberator. But don't stay silent and smug while the damage piles up. The same goes for Palestine. If a Palestinian fighting for freedom picks up a weapon from an Israeli source, do they toss it away because of where it came from? No, that would be absurd. The question isn't who made the tool, it's what you do with it. AI is used to identify people in crowds. I asked a generative AI instance how to thwart that kind of identification, and it gave me a list of ways to avoid AI detection, which I then published on social media to let others know as well. Like any power, AI can liberate or oppress. So get educated, get involved, not with arrogance, but with urgency, because history won't remember who stayed clean. It'll remember who showed up. That's it for this episode of At Home in My Head, exploring experience and meaning in individuals and the broader society. Like and subscribe if you enjoy these talks, and in the meantime, stay safe, be well, and never stop exploring.